contrary to those expectations, Israel is seen as the source of stability in the region, not instability. It doesn't mean the Palestinian issue isn't important, but I can tell you that major Arab leaders said to us, if I asked my people, name the top 50 issues, this wouldn't even make it. That they want to have relations with Israel. They think Israel has a lot to offer them.
Ahlan wa sahlan. Shalom from Jerusalem. This is Dan Diker and my co-host Khaled Abu Toameh. Welcome to Al Shakawalan Lana. This is our Middle East, and we're here in the studios in Jerusalem, and we're very pleased to have one of the great figures in the international Jewish world, Malcolm Hoenlein, the vice chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. Welcome, Malcolm. Today, we're going to be talking about between the Abraham Accords and the Palestinians, opportunities and obstacles for Israel and the Arab world. Let's get right into it, gentlemen. We've got a really ironic situation in the Middle East in which Israel, for the first time beginning in 2020, is really making inroads with its new Arab partners. And we know recently that Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen was in Khartoum, Sudan, to sign a prospective peace agreement with the government as it transitions to civilian power. And yet at the same time, the state of play with the Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority, and all the more so Hamas, has never been worse. Khaled, what is your sense? Give us some perspective on how to understand this broken picture in the Middle East.
Well, unfortunately, Dan, we don't really see any positive changes on the Palestinian side. I talked to many Palestinian officials, and we don't see that, they are ready for any change regarding Israel. They're not open to the idea of normalization. And even worse, we see that there's still a massive campaign of incitement against Israel in the Palestinian media, in the rhetoric. We were talking about Sudan and Israel normalizing their relations. First of all, note that the Palestinian Authority did not even report about it. They ignored it completely, while Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and several other factions condemned Sudan and are inciting the people in Sudan against the regime in Sudan, against General Burhan. They're actually calling for the Arab people to overthrow their government. Why? Because it's a crime to normalize relations with Israel.
Well, this is something that does not reach the Western discourse, Khaled, and I'm going to turn to Malcolm in a minute. In other words, you're leading journalist for the last over 30 years in the Middle East. What is the disconnect here, where the Palestinian issue has become one of a real head-on collision between the Palestinians and its Arab brethren, if you will?
You see, I would say that the Palestinians are still trapped in that idea that the Arab world has to be with them, that the Arab world should support them unconditionally, that the Arab world should never approach Israel or come close to Israel before the Palestinian issue is resolved. So in that sense, they're actually trying to blackmail the Arab world. They're trying to threaten, intimidate the Arab world. How dare you make peace with Israel and bypass us, ignore the Palestinian issue? Anything you want to do with Israel, it has to go through us. The Palestinian position is very clear. Their argument is, look at the Arab Peace Initiative. It says that the Arab countries will normalize relations with Israel only after all the Palestinian demands are met, including a full withdrawal to the pre-1967 lines. And what is worrying the Palestinians, both the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad, is that some Arab countries, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, are now willing to break away from that position and say, sorry, we're not going to wait for you Palestinians. You guys can't even get your act together. You guys don't even know what you want. You're divided. You're fighting each other. So we, the Arab countries, are going to move on with our, and look after our own interests, we will do what is good for our people. And when you Palestinians wake up, you're welcome to join us.
Now, what we're hearing, Malcolm Hoenlein, we're hearing from Khaled Toameh, who has his ear to the ground and his pen and pencil on paper for the last 30 years on this issue. This collision that he's talking about between the Arab world and the Palestinians, it does not seem to be reaching the Western discourse, and certainly not American Jewry.
It's only part of what isn't reaching Western discourse, and the distortions and misrepresentations in the media continue unabated. And the theory, which was held by American officials as well, was that until you resolve the Palestinian-Israeli issue, there could never be peace in the region, and Israel would always remain isolated. Look how many people warned and talked about Israel's isolation, Israel being alone in the region, that everybody would turn against them, when in fact today, I know how many times we're approached by Muslim countries, by African countries, by others asking, can you introduce us to Israeli officials? So contrary to those expectations, Israel is seen as the source of stability in the region, not instability. It doesn't mean the Palestinian issue isn't important, but I can tell you that major Arab leaders said to us, if I asked my people, name the top 50 issues, this wouldn't even make it. That they want to have relations with Israel. They think Israel has a lot to offer them. And they're tired of the kleptocracy. They're tired of being held hostage by the Palestinians who could have had peace. They had the Barak plan, the Omer plan, the wide negotiations, Annapolis, so many things, so many opportunities, including Gaza disengagement, where they could have proven their true intention. But I think, as Khaled rightly points out, they're not interested really in peace, and they don't want to be held accountable. They don't want a democratic structure. Abbas doesn't want to have elections, and they shift the onus always onto Israel for it. And too many countries in the West then automatically fall into that mantra, which puts the condemnation of Israel. The Abraham Accord broke that taboo and proved that these countries, who are not saying we dismiss the issue and we want to see a resolution to it, but frankly, we have bigger issues where we are not going to keep pouring money in just to line the pockets of Palestinian officials, that when they're ready to negotiate, we'll be here to help, but no more of the just open pockets policy of the past to try to quell any threats from Palestinian terrorists and others against these regimes. And it opened a new vista, which I think is really unlimited now in many new areas, and I'm, as you know, working on some of that, to see the possibilities. You mentioned Sudan, which will come, and it's not the biggest prize, that there is available to Israel, I think, in the coming future. But it is very significant because it's a gateway to Africa. It's a country that has, in fact, a Jewish history in Khartoum, where you had a long-time Jewish community. But more than that, it adds to the momentum, and that a country sitting on the Nile of importance, potentially important, with so many needs that Israel could fulfill, as is true of the other countries in the region who look for medtech, agritech, water reclamation, so many things that Israel is expert on. So we could change the whole region to the benefit of the Palestinians if they would have a leadership that would be responsive.
So if we were sitting here with the heads of the conservative reform movements in the United States in this podcast room, they would say, Malcolm, what are you talking about? Until you figure out the Palestinian issue, until Israel stops, quote unquote, occupying Palestinian land, there's not going to be, there's really nothing that much to talk about in terms of the relationship between the U.S. Jewry, North American Jewry, and Israel. And you have a situation today in which there are many congregations within the Reform and Conservative and Reconstructionist movement that will not accept a discussion or will not refuse to host certain members of the Israeli government. But on the other hand, every single one of those communities would welcome Mahmoud Abbas, the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, with open arms. I mean, there's something very strange going on, in this discussion where we hear a certain description of reality from Khaled, from you, and my own observations being here 3.5 decades, and what the state of play is in U.S.-Israel relations.
Well, I think we should not talk about reform movements, conservative movements, other movements being that way. It is not true that a lot of their members, do not adopt those kind of policies. There may be people who will get the notice because the media will always focus on those who criticize Israel. It's man bites dog stories. They will never talk about the vast majority who remain solidly supportive of Israel. They may have criticisms, they may have differences. I think a lot of it is not based on knowledge, but on media reports, which often distort the reality here. And there are legitimate concerns that can be raised. But it's not that the members and entire movements, sometimes, you have rabbis, leaders, others who self-proclaimed leaders who have, who feel and take to themselves the liberty of criticizing Israel publicly, which I think people can differ on a policy issue, but you have to think about what are the consequences of your words. What happens when they go write letters now to members of Congress and others who are not favorable to Israel and use this as a cover to say, look, this is Jews who are coming to us and saying these things. There are plenty of fora and opportunities to express our disagreements, concerns. But if you look at Israel's record overall, and the polls all show that the American Jews still remain supportive, even amongst young people, the problem is we're facing broad ignorance and, very facile approaches to complicated issues. I think government of Israel has to do more to be careful about how they give expression to some of the policies and at times, but the basics of the relationship. It's an adjustment for many countries to realize that this is not the Israel of the 40s, 50s, 60s, where we were the rich American uncle, and that they are independent, wealthy, high-tech, doing so many things in a model, and the majority of Jews will live in Israel. But there has to be mutual sensitivity, mutual understanding, and understand that the enemies of both and the enemies of Israel mean us too. They're targeting Israel as the collective Jew, because you can't say I hate Jews, although increasingly you can, and we see the manifestations. But you can say I hate Israel, I hate Zionists, and when in reality we know that they mean all of us. They don't make a distinction. And so I think people have to be much more careful with public pronouncements. I think both sides have to be more sensitive to the implications of their actions and their words. But I think overall, the bond between diaspora Jewry and Israel is more important than ever. When we face the onslaught of anti-Semitism, Israel's role is far more significant than it was during the golden era but it played the critical role that enabled us to play a role in the rescue of Russian Jews, Ethiopian Jews, Syrian Jews, Yemeni Jews. That couldn't have been possible. And that's the difference from 1938 when people make these comparisons. It's not that the world cares more about us, and it's not that the world doesn't still have the indifference and some of the negative attributes that were true then, that it facilitated the Nazi actions. It is that we have a state of Israel with an IAF and IDF, and I hope the difference is that we have learned the lesson, that never again isn't just a hollow phrase, but it's a pledge that each generation, by the way, I believe Jew and non-Jew, has to take anew, that we have to approach the world with a clear understanding of what's at stake. And the stakes are higher and higher, and perhaps the highest since the 1945, given the rise of anti-Semitism, its pervasive influence, and especially being aided and abetted by an internet that enables them to spread messages of hate instantly everywhere.
One of the disconnects, Malcolm and Khaled, I'm going to ask your sense of this, is that today Israel stands at the center of a lot of the anti-Semitism in the West, which means to say, it's not that Israel's fault, but Israel is being recast as the villain, which Israel's adversaries and the adversaries of the Jewish people would hold, that if Israel weren't around or if Israel would start behaving, that anti-Semitism would go away. And yet, on the other hand, here you see, as probably one of the most prominent analysts of Arab affairs, the most prominent of Arab affairs and Palestinian affairs, yourself an Israeli Arab Muslim journalist, that Israel's strength, not only as a regional power today, but as a global power, has had a positive effect, it seems, on its relationship with the Arab world. I mean, the three no's of Khartoum, Sudan of 1967, no recognition, no peace, no negotiations, has become full recognition, normalization, negotiations, and peace. How do you understand it from your view?
That's exactly what is worrying the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority's strategy over the past 10, 15 years has been to isolate Israel in the international arena, to undermine Israel's status, to depict Israel as a rogue state, to convince as many countries as possible to boycott Israel, to impose sanctions on Israel. And here come the Abraham Accords. Here come some Arab countries moving closer to Israel, and this is driving Mahmoud Abbas and the rest of the Palestinian leaders in Ramallah crazy. They cannot tolerate it, especially when it comes from an Arab. And you would hear from them many times statements such as, we don't understand, why are Arabs coming closer to Israel when Westerners, our friends, and even some American Jews are siding with us against Israel? That's something they cannot understand, and that's what really worries them. Now, I would add to that something very important. Those who endorse the narrative of the Palestinian Authority, whether they are some American Jews, and I've met some of them, by the way, or Europeans or others, they're causing damage to the peace process or to any future peace process between Israel and the Palestinians, and they're doing a big disservice and damage even to the Palestinian people. Because if you focus only on Israel, you're allowing the Palestinian Authority to get away with many things, such as no elections, no democracy, no freedom of speech, no freedom of the media, no accountability, and that's very important. And that's exactly what the Palestinian Authority wants. The Palestinian Authority wants to shift the onus on Israel with the, with the help of Westerners. And that's why I keep saying that they're doing a disservice to the Palestinian people, and they're causing damage to any future peace process, because they're empowering the Palestinian Authority or emboldening it not to go back to the negotiating table, because the Palestinian Authority is saying, why should we go back to the negotiating table? Look, everyone is supporting us. We have all this worldwide support. So the only way to get concessions from Israel is through pressure on Israel and not at the negotiating table.
You see, what Khaled Abu Toameh is saying, Malcolm, is that there has been a branded narrative in the West, which was a strategic mandate of Yasser Arafat and his deputy Mahmoud Abbas, the current chairman of the Palestinian Authority, to divide and conquer diaspora Jewry, separate them from Israel, and isolate Israel in that sense. So this is a real challenge for Western Jewry. I accept very much, the polling numbers support what you just said, Malcolm, which is that the vast majority of American Jews support Israel. Israel is their anchor of identity. Very much true. However, there has been this branded identity that Khaled Abu Toameh really just pointed to now in the West, which is really called the Palestinian issue first, the Palestinian issue first. And it's understandable. I'm not criticizing it. But how do you begin to change that narrative when the reality in the Middle East, with Israel engaging with new Arab partners, engaging with scores of African countries, and yet in the West there's this issue of Israel is still is Israel a colonialist power, imperialist power? They're using this libel called apartheid, which I call apartheid anti-Semitism. How do you square that circle of these dueling narratives, which are not winning friends for Israel in the Western discourse and very much in many circles within the American Jewish discourse?
Well, part of the problem is that truth is a victim today. That we see the distortions. When Israel went into Jenin recently, the headlines in CBS and NPR, everybody was saying 9 Palestinians killed. Nobody said something. Nobody said anything about the fact that these were terrorists, and maybe one civilian amongst them. When we talk about the casualty numbers in Gaza, when they propagate all the lies, they never say that Abbas is in the 15th, 16th year, right, of his 4-year term, that if you want to talk about the loss of democracy, Israel's had 5 elections in 3 or 4 years. I mean, we have an abundance of democracy in Israel, and you have an absolute absence in the Palestinian Authority and every other standard that you would use. And finally, many of the Arab countries said, you know what? We've been reading this all wrong. If you look at the rise of anti-Semitism around the world, there's only one place, one region where you have a diminution, not elimination, but diminution, and that is in the Arab countries, where you see Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE changing their textbooks, Bahrain certainly, holding Holocaust acknowledgement ceremonies and Holocaust memorial ceremonies. In Morocco, amazing things happening there. And you're not getting demonstrations against it. Flag, you get some opposition, I guess. But overall, these things are beginning to be accepted. And for many years, we tried to get Egypt to change their textbooks. Others, they did. You know who didn't? The Palestinian Authority. They made the textbooks worse. And I think in Jordan also we haven't seen an improvement. But there is a change that's taking place. And if the world would be united behind it and encouraging it, and the United States government, I think, has and deserves credit. The past administration, even this administration now talks about the Abraham Accords, have been working with us on the next stages of opening Israel's relationships in the region. But it's a dynamic that is beyond them. They look and they say, well, what country became water independent, energy independent? All the things that everybody said Israel would be isolated and limited by has reversed. They are the high-tech miracle, and everybody says, get us help from Israel in agri-tech and post-harvest reclamation and everything that the African countries need, the Muslim countries want. And they say all of a sudden, you know what? Israel isn't the source of the problem here. Israel's part of the solution, and we want to be in with them. Again, I don't want to dismiss the issues. They are important, and it will always be an irritant and a block, but it hasn't stopped these countries from saying, you know what, when the Palestinians are ready to sit down with Israel and negotiate, why didn't they take the 98% I think Barak offered, and 95% Olmert offered? Why didn't they? They had every opportunity in all the negotiations in the last 120 years. Every time they rejected, and the Jews accepted, even giving up the vast majority that create Jordan. And, we can go through the historical maps for people to understand it. The problem is that we have a media, and including in America, where bias and I think in some parts it's ignorance, but it's largely bias. They no longer have reporters. They have stringers, and most of those stringers are Palestinians who are reporting distorted news. If you look at the headlines, somebody just showed me this, 90% of the stories came from AP. So they will all put a different headline on it, but it's an AP story. It's not even original reporting. And so they say something distorted, and everybody else magnifies it. And so people's conclusions, even on the part of well-meaning people, as you know, I do radio broadcasts every week across America, around the world. And I see the reaction. When people get information, they light up. They want it. They want to know the truth. And I'm not saying you shove it down their throats and that, it's absolutes. Nothing in the world is absolutes. But this is a critical time, and a time when Jews are under siege, when people are getting the message that the attacks on Israel was really meant about them, that this was the acceptable way to express anti-Semitism was to go against Israel and the right of Jews to have a state of their own, not to criticize a policy, but to deny Israel's right to exist. And people have to step back and think about it. I think everywhere, on both sides of the ocean, we all have to. And we have to recognize the collectivity of responsibility that we have, together with good friends, Christians who stand up for Israel, Muslims who stand up for Israel, and many more will. Many countries approach us and say, can you help us be introduced in Israel? Can you enable us to be part of a lot of these initiatives? So there are really chances to improve the world, to go from Morocco to Japan and create a basin of stability, as we did in the Mediterranean, Greece, Cyprus, Israel. They didn't even talk to each other. And now look at the actions. Look at Juniper Oak. Did you see any media in America talk about the fact that 6,000 American troops were here, the biggest exercise in history? And not a word. 142 airplanes, 12 naval flotillas, the George Herbert Walker Bush aircraft carrier. It was massive. And what were they doing? They're talking about how Israel and America have to work together. It's a collective responsibility. You have a great power. Israel's a small country, but it has great abilities and capabilities. And America now in CENTCOM came to recognize it. And so did the Gulf countries. And together, they're going to be able to stand against the real enemies, which are Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood and the coalitions that they form together sometimes with great powers in the world.
Malcolm, when you speak this way, it reminds me of the way reporters and analysts used to talk in the 1970s about Israel, the 1980s about Israel.
1967.
Now you're aging all of us in the studio, except yourself.
I read about it.
Yeah, when it said Moshe Rabbeinu 120, and then it said in the footnote in the Steinsaltz edition, see Malcolm Hoenlein, it'd be 145. But besides that, I want to reveal a secret on this podcast that I've spoken, that Khaled and I have spoken about for years, and that's called the Western media has given the Palestinian Authority a pass for 30 years. We're at the 30th anniversary of Oslo.
And encourage it.
And they have given them a pass it's objectively speaking, it's not a political statement, because as Khaled knows, I have many friends on the Palestinian side, and I've met many officials even on the Palestinian side. The Palestinian Authority has been given a pass by the Western media for two reasons. One, because the state of Israel, Memshelot Yisrael, Israeli governments, have consciously avoided some of the worst anti-Semitic discourse since World War II that comes out of the Palestinian radio and television and social networks, and blood libels that come out of the Nazi era, that come out of Soviet conspiracy discourse, and incentivization to terror through pay for slay. They have engaged in international legal terror through fraudulently appealing to the ICJ, the ICC, the UN. Just the other day, the UN is opening yet another. They have a permanent committee of inquiry, but they have another inquiry on the basis of Israeli apartheid. In other words, we have witnessed a policy by the Palestinian Authority of erasure of Israel. And at the same time, Israeli governments, all Israeli governments, not this side or that side, as well as American governments by extension and European governments, have given the Palestinian Authority a pass because they're afraid that if they call out the Palestinian Authority, you could possibly see a Palestinian Authority collapse. Khaled, can you weigh in on this issue?
Well, as I said before, I mean, those who are ignoring the actions and the rhetoric of the Palestinian Authority are causing damage both to the Palestinian people and to a peace process, to the prospects of a peace process. I work with the Western media. I've worked with them for the past nearly 4 decades, and I can tell you there's a very serious problem with the way the international media looks at this conflict, because most of my colleagues come here and with this perception that there's a conflict going on in the Middle East, and in this conflict, there are good guys and bad guys. And it's like, Khaled, please stop confusing us with the facts. Now, this is causing a lot of damage to Israel and to Jews worldwide. This obsession with Israel is promoting anti-Semitism, and it's even endangering the lives of Jews worldwide. I'm not saying Israel should not be criticized, but what I'm asking is the following. Is there nothing else happening on the other side? When was the last time you read a story about corruption in the Palestinian Authority? When was the last time you read a story in the mainstream media in the West about Hamas crackdown on human rights activists, on journalists, on women in Gaza? Why is it pay for slay and all these things? I mean, why is it that most of the journalists who come here, they wake up in the morning and they search for any story that reflects negatively on Israel? These are questions that need to be asked, and the media coverage has become part of the problem, not any solution. And many of my colleagues, my Western colleagues, are blindly endorsing the Palestinian narrative without asking questions, without seeing any wrongdoing on the other side. And as you mentioned, I think there is a problem also with the Israeli side, that the Israeli governments or the Israeli establishment is not really paying enough attention to that. This is what is vilifying Israel. This is what is demonizing Jews worldwide. Most people, or I call them Israel haters, I meet, they're influenced by the media. The media plays a major role in shaping people's opinions and creating perceptions and misconceptions about this conflict. Just 2 weeks ago, I received a request from a Japanese journalist asking me if I can take her to Gaza to interview Jewish settlers living there. So
did you find any? Did you find any?
You know,
that's right.
See, these are some of the problems that that need to be faced and challenged. And
well, you know what we're going to do here on this program, on our program here from the heart of Jerusalem, Al-Sharq al-Awsat Lana, which is called Our Middle East. Khaled, it's your Middle East. It's my Middle East. It's our Middle East. And what we're doing on this program is called Facts, Context, and Perspective. You're going to get the real story, and no holds barred, and no one preserved.
And we want it to be a very good Middle East, and as you said, for all of us, our Middle East, and in Arabic, Al-Sharq al-Awsat Lana, and that is the right approach. We want to build bridges, not destroy bridges.
And
Absolutely.
Israel is stuck here. Israel can't lift up anchor and go away. It's here, and it's going to stay in the region, and has so much to contribute. All the countries will benefit. I mean, why do Gulf and others, they're rich countries, we all see in the perspective, but they know that, and they've told us how much they stand to gain from Israel. And if you take away, just think of what all this creativity, how we could just make the whole region blossom. The dream in the 60s was Israel would be the Switzerland of the Middle East. Well, it's becoming the Switzerland of the Middle East and could benefit everybody, especially Palestinians, if they would just give them a chance.
This is the Switzerland of the Middle East, and let's all get a chalet, and I want to bring our North American brothers and sisters. That's part of the bridge. The bridge is to build to North American Jewry every week on our program, as well as to the Middle East and Africa. And with Israel being positioned as a global power, having new friends, new allies, and still confronting old adversaries. We're going to bring it all here on Al-Sharq Al-Awsat Lana, our Middle East. Thank you all. Malcolm Hoenlein, Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, and really one of the great leaders of the Jewish world in the last 50 years. Thank you very much for joining us here in Jerusalem. Khaled Abu Toameh, always an honor and a pleasure to have you as a co-host. I'm Dan Diker. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you, and we'll be speaking with you again next week. God bless.